Hello, you're listening to Storytelling Saga, the podcast that shares stories. I'm your host, Allie, and this week I'm excited to be chatting with writer, producer, and director Craig Shemin. Welcome, Craig.
Well, thank you, Allison. It's great to be here.
So excited to chat with you and learn more about your career. So, to start, I wanted to know specifically if there were any shows, movies, actors, things like that for you growing up that you would say helped influence you in wanting to pursue a career in writing.
Well, it's interesting. I don't think when I was very little, there were a lot of people who influenced me to pursue a career in writing. I didn't think about that until a little later. But there were certainly things that I loved watching as a kid. I remember every day watching the reruns of Star Trek. They were on in like the afternoon here in New York on Channel 11. I think they were on like 5 or 6 o'clock. And that was really kind of cool, especially, um, you know, my family was in between color televisions because they had one when my brother was little and then it broke and they got a black and white to replace it. So I remember as a childhood watching black and white television and all of these things that were really so vivid to me, like Star Trek and the Batman TV show, that were these big colorful shows. I experienced them first in black and white. I didn't know that Star Trek was in color until my brother had this making of Star Trek book, and on the back there were
Hmm.
color photos of the set, and I'm like, oh my goodness, this is spectacular. This show looks like this. So I guess maybe I was paying closer attention to the words and the storytelling than I was to the visuals because everything was sort of a flat gray to me. So certainly Star Trek, Batman, a lot of the comedies like The Odd Couple, the original one, not the later one with Matthew Perry, but and things that Abbott and Costello and the
Hmm.
Marx Brothers, those were really really important to me growing up. And then I guess later on, the Muppets certainly, because I was in the first sort of Sesame Street graduating class, I guess you'd say. I was 3 years old when the show premiered, so I was right in that
Hmm.
sweet spot. So Sesame Street, the Muppet Show, and it was, and then I started when I was in high school and college paying a little closer attention to the construction and the writing, and then I was paying attention to things that were influencing me to become a writer and storyteller.
That's wonderful. And I understand you graduated from Northwestern University. So then did you specifically major in writing?
No, I
Hmm.
was a major. They didn't have in the entertainment side. They have. I was a major in radio, television, and film, which
Oh,
it was called
cool.
then. Now, not so much on radio, but I don't know what they. I think it's. But that was what it was called then. Radio, TV, film. I took as many writing classes as I could, and they had within that school of communications, there was a sort of, I guess you would be a certificate program in writing for the media. And I was like, they allow 12 people in it every year. And I was like 13th on the list. I was the alternate
Wow.
because it was interesting. I had a job working for Stuart Kaminsky, who was the head of the department then. I was a work study job. And Stuart really was a great supporter of my work. And he told me that the people that were making the decisions, that on the panel, they thought my writing samples were too commercial in
Oh.
nature. And I'm like, but isn't that the point? We're trying to get jobs. So I guess so. I wasn't on the in that certificate program, but Stuart made sure I got into anything that I wanted to get into on the writing side. He taught,
Hmm.
a graduate level seminar. He made sure I got into that. Um, basically I took everything that I could take, including playwriting. There was a two-course playwriting sequence in um, in the theater department, and I took that. And David Schwimmer was one of my classmates in that. And so yeah, I mean, there wasn't. So I didn't major in writing specifically, but I did as much writing stuff as I could.
Nice. And so then tell me about what, like after graduating college, what was your first job out of college?
Well, I had interned between junior and senior year
Mm,
for the Jim Henson Company. It was then
mm.
called Henson Associates. And I was fortunate enough to get a job offer from them to come back in the public relations department. It wasn't exactly, where I wanted to be, but it was a foot in the door. And, the bulk of my classmates were not getting any job offers. So I figured I'd do that. And I lived at home in New Jersey. I commuted to Manhattan every day. And I worked in the PR department. But I made it clear to them what I really wanted to do was be writing, and they gave me opportunities. So I started writing stories about the Muppets for the publishing department. They had a little sort of subscription storybook thing where people would buy a subscription to these 500-word stories. It was an illustrated story card that they would get like 8 of them a month or whatever for their kids. So I wrote a bunch of those, and then I started writing the newspaper interviews for the Muppets and mag reviews. And then I started doing work for the television appearances. I would work with the Today Show people and write up jokes and work with the performers and go to the Today Show at 4 in the morning and work to coordinate those appearances. So little by little, I started doing more writing there, and they let me also do freelance writing, non Henson projects. So I got some work on the outside as well.
Oh, that's really amazing. So then did you get to work directly with Jim Henson himself?
Yeah, a little bit. I
Mm,
was there for a couple of years. I mean, I met Jim first in the summer internship era when I
mm.
was there between junior and senior year. And I met Jim. It was at the company softball game, and it was very,
Oh, wow.
very nice. And then I worked with him a little bit doing interview questions. So if they wanted a quote from Jim, if somebody needed a quote from Jim for a newspaper article or something, they would put in, they asked my department for a quote, and then sometimes what I would do, they'd send me up to Jim's office. I'd
Mm.
say, hey, what do you think about such and such? We need a quote, and he'd talk for a little bit, and then I'd take notes and I'd go down and write that up into a quote, and then send it back to Jim, and he would sign off on it. And then the first time I wrote for the Muppets that was actually performed, not
Mm.
just in on paper, was Jim doing Kermit. Um,
Wow. Mm.
I had written, along with Bill Prady and Jim Lewis, the three of us sort of worked on it together, this
Mm.
speech for Kermit to do at the Disney stockholder meeting. This was at a time when they were getting ready to sell the Muppets to Disney in a deal that
Oh.
ultimately did not go through because Jim passed away before it was finalized.
Mm.
So that was sort of my first time, writing for actual performance of the Muppets, and it was
Oh, that's
Jim.
so interesting. That's essentially like an upfront then, correct?
Yeah, it was kind of like that. It was basically what they would do is they would have this, every public corporation has to have a shareholder meeting. So Disney sort of would turn it into a show as much as possible. So I think this one was at the Anaheim Convention Center, and they would bring out, celebrity guests to talk about things. They would give the numbers that they have to do legally. They would take questions, and in this case, we had Kermit sort of opening up the event and introducing Michael Eisner, who was the chairman of Disney. And then they did a little back and forth, and then, so I was in the studio when when we were taping this part with Jim, and so they needed someone to do the Michael Eisner part for when they talked to each other. So I was off stage, doing the Michael Eisner lines for Jim to respond to. And yeah, so that's basically what that sort of event was. And then at the end, because they're trying to, most people who own stock in Disney, it's
Mm.
like rah rah, but they're always, I think one term for the people are gadflies. So they go to these um, shareholder meetings basically to make trouble, to ask questions that
Oh.
don't want to be asked. And like,
Mm.
why isn't this project union or why isn't that? And so Disney they have to deal with it as much as possible, but one way they deal with it is by putting as much sort of positive, they're making it a positive experience, making this meeting. So they had the meeting. I didn't go to it, but uh, we knew that this was the whole thing. And part of Kermit's thing is he came back at the end to, because right after the meeting, they were going to adjourn the meeting, and everybody at the meeting got to go to Disneyland.
Oh, wow.
And it was Kermit's like, "Hey, we're going to Disneyland, yay!" Um, yeah, so that was that, and I ended up doing a whole bunch of stuff like that over the years, various corporate events and speeches and things. You end up doing a lot of that when.
I do find that interesting. Obviously, because the Muppets is a huge franchise, so many different projects, all these different things. So that's not necessarily something that like I would think of. So that's really cool. Like outside of like the shows and everything.
Mm.
That's
Oh yeah,
fascinating.
I remember one, because we would, before the whole Disney thing happened, and even after, because that deal didn't go through, and that the Hensons kept the characters until later
Oh.
on. They sold the Muppets to Disney, and and they bought back the company. There's a whole big thing. But I remember doing one of our licensees for Henson merchandise, for Muppet merchandising, was the Mead Paper Company, and they made notebooks, for high school notebooks. And one of the things that we had to do was, the Muppets sales film for the Mead Paper Company.
Hmm.
So we have to have Kermit and Gonzo, and you write this thing, and they're talking about, and Gonzo thinks they're doing a promotion for a meat company and not the Mead
Oh.
Company. So he's trying to come up with all these great meat ideas, and you want to try and do it in a fun and funny way, because
Hmm.
you're trying to remind the clients why they got into business with the Muppets, that it's going to be a fun, entertaining thing. And that goes way back to when Jim Henson first started, because he would do a lot of these Muppet commercials, very
Hmm.
short things, and he, as part of that, they would do sales meetings and sales films where oftentimes that was just more funny and silly than the actual commercials, because they could, really talk to the salesman, and do more outrageous things than they could put on television. But we couldn't compete with what Jim did back in the 60s, because we didn't have the time or the money, but mostly the time. And so you try and make it as fun as possible, because one of the you know one of the things that people don't think about is, anytime you see a Henson product or a Muppet product,
Hmm.
there's a whole big history behind it. There's a business behind it. Someone had to make a license, and it has to go through the art directors, and it has to get approved. And then on the creative side, either me or Jim Lewis or whoever's doing it now, we would write the text that would be on the tags, or come up with the copy for the posters. And I wrote many series of trading cards. So you get to know a little bit about how all of this stuff goes together.
I do find that so interesting. And so when you're creating this copy, for example, do you approach it from the character perspective first and then the product, or how does that work?
Um, we try, most everything we did at Muppets, it all came from character. We would try and figure out what the best approach to a specific product was, based on character. And of course, the one who always had the richest source of material was Miss Piggy, because you could do wonderful things with her on greeting cards, on trading cards, and even stationery. We wrote a lot of Miss Piggy stationery. But you could also have fun. One of the weirdest things I ever wrote um, was, we had a licensee for checks, and we had a Kermit. It'd just be a big picture of the character, and there was like a little space where you could put just like one little line. And I think, for Fozzie was something like, you know, would you take a check from this bear, or something like that,
Mhm.
where you could just sort of come up with a joke or a line, and you had to sort of really make it very short and snappy. And a lot of
Mhm.
times it was Waka Waka, something or other. You had shortcuts to take. But everything came from character. And it was, one of the great things was when we did those notebooks, the Mead notebooks, I wrote the back, we had a whole page on the back of the notebooks where we could basically do like a little Muppet cartoon. So you could do a Muppet Labs thing, or we did a Pigs in Space adventure as like a sort of like a comic book thing. And yeah, I mean, the if you know the characters well, and they're really well defined characters, I hate saying this, but it kind of writes itself. You allow the characters to populate your head, and it will come out.
No, definitely, because obviously these characters are so ubiquitous, so beloved, and we as like the audience just know the essence of these characters from spanning generations, all these different projects. That's really wonderful. Now, do you have a favorite? This may be different. Do you have a personal favorite Muppet and or a favorite to write for?
Well, the favorite to write for, I think, would be Piggy. I was able to learn a lot. I worked with Frank Oz on a whole lot of these TV show appearances, and I co-wrote Miss Piggy's cookbook.
Oh, cool.
And you know, she certainly has a lot of ways to go in terms of angles and directions that you can take the humor. I
Mm.
think my favorite character is probably Rolf, just because he's sort
Oh,
of, he's very comfortable. He's secure in who he is. Um, he's very laid back. I like the character, but and of course I love Kermit. I love all the others, but the ones that you could have the most fun writing for, is certainly not Kermit. He's a challenging character to write for because he's sort of an everyman character.
mm.
So it's you got to try and manufacture the humor out of his interactions with the other characters. Because Kermit gets really funny if he gets agitated and angry, but he has to get to that. If you get him to that space without him earning it, it's not Kermit. Each of these characters have a different way of looking at life. One of the ways I think about it is if you, and this goes for any group of characters, if it's a well created family of characters, if you add all of the Muppets up together, it adds up to one normal person. And so you take that apart, and each of them has this really unique hook that you can hang on. So, they're all a lot of fun, and
Mm.
some of them are easier to write for when you're doing something that's performed. If you're doing just copy or captions or things like that on for product, Miss Piggy is the one that you're going to have the most fun with.
Makes sense. Well, I never thought of it that way. You're right. Together, they all work together, but then individually, that's where you get the conflicts, the different character voices and everything. That's so cool. And then for you personally, do you have a favorite, whether you're a fan of it, a Muppets project, or one that you worked on over the years?
Well, I mean, I think all of the stuff that before me, I mean, I love the Muppet Show and the first
Mm.
group of Muppet movies. And certainly Sesame Street. But I love like a lot of the early stuff in the 50s and 60s, and that's why I wrote a book about that called Sam and Friends, a
Yeah.
story of Jim Henson's first television show. Um, so I think that if you're talking about the stuff that I, my favorite of what I worked on, there are a lot of options there too. I got to work on a CD-ROM game, which it's crushing to me now because it's still a great thing, but nobody has Windows 95, so it can't be played. I think if you go to YouTube, you can there's some video clips of playthroughs of it, and I got to do that. And then I also love doing some of the live shows that we did. Um, a live Muppet show as part of the Muppet Fest fan convention in 2001, and then we did a live show at Carnegie Hall in 2012, and a live Henson concert in New Zealand a few years after
Oh,
that. It
wow.
was 2018, 20, yeah. And those I really love doing because, you know, you can just, it, there's something that's energizing about working in front of a live audience and hearing the response. But on the sad side is that they're not, they're, they're done and they're off into the ether. And we have archival recordings of a couple of them, but nothing that we can share. So it's sort of like, you know, if you were there, people still come up to me saying, "Oh, that show is amazing." Um, so those were really special, and you know, I'm really happy with so much I've done over the years. Nothing, I there's it would be harder to talk about something that I'm not proud of at Muppets as I can. I mean, I had a good time.
That's wonderful. Tell me about writing your book, Sam and Friends, Story of Jim Henson's first television show, as well as your other book you wrote. What was it? The
Muppets
Muppets
Character
Characters
Encyclopedia.
Encyclopedia? Yeah.
Well, and there's another book coming called the Sam and Friends script
Oh,
book.
oh, cool.
And I think if you're a writer, you'll be intrigued by that because was able to compile about 60
Wow.
surviving scripts from the Sam and Friends show, and I've annotated them, and we're gonna publish that uh, you know, soon, hoping by the
Oh,
end of the year.
oh,
And
amazing.
yeah, it was interesting because for a long time I thought it wouldn't be possible because only about 15 episodes of Sam and Friends survive. You had to save them on Kinescope at that time. It was very expensive to do that. Kinescope was a film. You'd point a film camera at a TV screen and basically
Wow.
film that, and that's why, you know, so it was very expensive with the cost of film and processing. So they didn't save a lot of shows. And I was always interested in that because Jim was this college student
Hmm.
creating this whole new thing. And it's a great, inspiring story for kids and for young artists of any age, because Jim was able to sort of create this wonderful thing without a lot of special supplies. You know, the
Hmm.
Muppets. You know, Kermit was made out of his mother's coat,
Yeah.
you know, and a ping pong ball. So, uh, it's a great inspiration for makers and creators. And a few years ago, they found reel-to-reel audio tapes that Jim had made starting in 1958
Hmm.
of Sam and Friends. So that represented more than 400 episodes that Jim had saved in that
Wow.
way. And then with the file folder of scripts and with you know, the photos and things that do survive in the Jim Henson Company archives, which is run by a wonderful person named Karen Falk. I thought that maybe there was uh, a way to write a book about that, and then I approached the Henson family and the Henson Company, and Lisa Henson was kind enough to allow that to happen. And it took about 3 years to bring it all together. But
Oh,
I wanted to do it really to inspire. You know, the story is a great story, but it's really, you know, the book is there to try and encourage and inspire young artists and also to tell Jane Henson's story.
oh.
Um, Jim's wife, Jane, always stepped back from taking any credit. She would
Hmm.
always say, "Oh, I just helped, you know, I was just a helper." And the more research I did, the more I learned that that wasn't the case. You know, that she was a genuine partner. She built some of these characters. She worked uh, side by side with Jim, not just on the Sam and Friends show, but on the commercials and running the company. And I wanted to really communicate to the readers of the book that Jane was a partner in this enterprise and not just a helper.
Oh, how wonderful. That's beautiful that you got to write this book, and that's fantastic because it's in a way preserving the legacy of Jim
Yeah,
Henson
and
outside. Yeah.
it's sad. I had to kind of wait. It just sort of happened that
Oh.
this didn't happen until after Jane had passed, because that's when
Oh.
we didn't find those Sam and Friends tapes until afterwards. But then I started realizing that if Jane was still alive, I don't know if she would like this book because it gives her credit. You know, I remember when she was reading an early draft of Brian J. Jones's book, the Jim Henson biography, um, she thought it was giving her too much credit. And
Oh.
Brian J. Jones said, no, no, you deserve this. He had done the research too. Um, so I think that in the dedication, one of the dedications in the book is to Jane, who I, I said in the dedication that she's going to get the credit she deserves, whether she likes it or not.
That's beautiful, though. I love that. And tell me then about your other book, The Muppets Character Encyclopedia.
Well, that is a book. I don't think it's out of print at the moment. I've asked Disney if we could revisit that and do a new version. But that was strictly as they say in the biz, a work for hire. And the publisher DK, and they were putting that together this book, and they asked me if I would write it, and I was very happy to do it. But it was a very, very accelerated schedule because it was a book that was being published to promote a certain movie. So we had to get the book in stores before the movie was out in theaters. So if I had more time, it would have been great. But it was very much it was a runaway train of a project where you had to keep on, I would, they would lay out the pages. I'd send me, I'd do the text, I'd send it back, and something, and you really usually didn't get chance to do a lot of fixes after the stuff was put together. So I think it came out relatively well, but I know that there's a Muppet wiki that tracks some of the inaccuracies on various things, and I know that there's a page or at least a section about some of the errors in the character encyclopedia. And one of the great things about doing that encyclopedia was that a lot of the characters that are represented in it um, really don't have a lot of backstory. They were created for
Oh.
one or two episodes. So it was up to me to come up with um, a lot of information and basically make up stuff if I couldn't find it out. So I
Oh.
worked with Jim Lewis, I mentioned before, was the sort of editorial consultant that was working on behalf of Disney. So he and I would go back and forth, and I'd write stuff, and he'd send stuff back, and we would sort of brainstorm on these these new facts we were creating.
Hmm. Oh, that's so interesting, though. Just, yeah, coming up with new things for lesser known characters.
Yeah,
Now,
because there's like one
yeah.
character, Angus McGonagall, the
Hmm.
gargling Argyle gargoyle, who he appeared in one episode of the Muppet Show. That's it. So,
Interesting.
we had to come up with some backstory for him.
Now, Jim Lewis, was he your writing partner at all? You're just a frequent collaborator?
Um, he was not, we were never officially writing partners, but we did work on
Hmm.
a lot of stuff together. So we wrote a Dog City animated show pilot when that became an animated series. And we wrote, the Muppet Show live stage show that we did at Muppet Fest. We did that together. And then it was kind of fun, full circle. Right before Jim retired, we worked on one last thing together, which was a Muppet Christmas Carol 30th anniversary event at
Oh, wow.
D23 Expo 2 years ago. So Disney had approached me to sort of produce this historical event, and as part of it, we had a couple of Muppet performances. So
Oh.
worked on those with Jim.
That's the beauty of Muppets. Like, it's certainly synonymous with live performance and with music, of
Yeah,
course. That's like, yeah, the true essence of Muppets. I watched A Muppet Christmas Carol for the first time this past Christmas.
the first time.
Yeah,
What'd
I
you
was like,
think? What'd you think?
I was like, it's phenomenal. I see why it's so beloved. I could see why it's
What
like some
was
people's favorite
Yeah,
version of A Christmas
and it
Carol.
was an amazing event. And if you go online, there's some of it posted on YouTube.
Oh, cool.
We
Hmm.
did a 1 hour thing where we opened the Muppets with the Muppets doing their own little panel, and then we brought out real people. We brought out Brian Henson, the director, and Paul
Hmm.
Williams, who wrote the music, and Dave Goles, who plays Gonzo, and Polly Smith, who designed all of the costumes.
Oh,
So we did a
wow.
whole little discussion with them, and then we had Jodie Benson, who was the voice of the Little Mermaid. She came
Oh,
out and sang the song that was cut from the movie and is now restored on Disney Plus.
oh, wow.
And
Hmm.
then we finished with a medley of the music. And what was amazing is, you know, the Muppets, we have we had them come out in their Muppet Christmas Carol costumes. The exact costumes were still in storage. It looked beautiful. And we still, we had there's this part in the song, even the vegetables don't like them. So we had the Muppet vegetables, and it was the same puppets from 30 years ago.
Wow.
They save everything.
Well, that's so cool. Because as you've been touching on, it's sad to think about all of this lost media that's just gone from time, from technology. So being able to preserve it as much as possible, it's sad just to think that like things that just are gone for whatever reason. That's
Yeah, and that's one of the projects. I'm sort of beyond the Muppet stuff. I'm writing a book about Jack Benny's guest appearances on television shows,
oh,
and I'm finding that that there are a bunch of shows that he appeared on that just don't exist anymore, and
wow.
that's it's a shame. Sort of in this century, there's a whole different thing happening
Hmm.
where companies are taking tax write-offs for shows
Yes.
and having
Yeah.
and they have to take them out of distribution. So that also it becomes a lost media thing, only for a different reason.
I know people are still rallying for to that point, like Coyote versus
Yep,
Acme. Yeah.
absolutely.
Gosh, hopefully that sees the light of day
And it's
someday.
a shame because um, the people in the front offices and the executive suites,
Mm.
they look at these projects as numbers on a ledger,
Wow.
and this is what this costs, and they're not thinking about the time and effort and sweat that went into creating the work, and it's a shame.
Oh, absolutely. Oh gosh, but yeah, that's like sadly the nature of the business. Um, but I want to ask you, generally speaking, and I don't know, I just want to know, like, do you have a favorite medium, would you say? Do you prefer like writing books, or do you prefer writing for television or playwriting? I just love to hear your thoughts on that.
It's a really interesting question, and I think I would have had a different answer a
Mm,
couple of years ago. Um, I right now I'm really liking writing the book projects. I find that um, it's a direct way of communicating with your audience. There's
mm,
no there's nothing between your words and the readers. And if you're working in television or film or the theater or anything like that, there's someone interpreting your work. And usually, and I've been very fortunate, usually it makes it better. And I think that I've been fortunate to work with wonderful performers and writer and directors and producers who take what I've written and um, and make it better. Uh, there, the frustration comes nowadays to me is I spent a lot of my career writing for kids. Didn't really
mm.
set out to do that, but and then I sort of got pigeonholed into writing for preschoolers. You do something well, that's what they do. So I did a lot of stuff for Disney and for Nickelodeon and um, for PBS, Amazon, um, and the what's been happening lately, and it
Mm.
always was an element. Um, the curriculum elements have become more and more overpowering in terms of the process. When I started, you would get some curriculum points, and there would be an advisor. There would be an educational advisor. But now you'd often, sometimes there are five or six advisors on a show. You'd be getting input on different um, parts of the story. I did some episodes of one of the versions of Dora. This was
Mm.
Dora and Friends, and we had a language advisor, we had a Latin culture advisor, we had a story advisor, um, I think one or two others, and then you also had a education, a research department, and sometimes it just got tough to keep it fun and funny
Mm.
because there were all of these warnings. And sometimes the notes you would get are contradictory to each other. And having said that, I'll say that the people that I worked with on Dora are great people. I had fun doing it. It was an interesting project, and I got to go while they did the research. they would read the stories out to kids at various preschools, all get together and go out to a preschool in Brooklyn or in Montclair, New Jersey. And you'd watch um, the research assistants read the story out to the kids and show them pictures. And this was before, this was when before we had, animated anything. This is early on. You're testing the scripts, and you could watch the kids really follow it if they're not following. And then the research people would interview the kids to ask them what they liked most or least about the shows. So it's an interesting process, and I liked working on that show, but it just gets very tough to keep. You know, I think about what I loved, the spontaneity of the stuff I watched when I was a kid. It's hard to get that nowadays. Um, and you look back at the old Bugs Bunny cartoons, which were done just to be funny, and you don't really have that luxury on a lot of the kids stuff nowadays. And sometimes I love when something gets through that is really funny, and because I think something can be really funny and really educational and positive and good for kids to watch. But I think one of the problems, one of the risks that you run is that all of the curriculum advisors and the research people sometimes want every episode of every show to accomplish everything. And, there's not a lot of room for funny when you try and do that. I still do stuff from time to time, but it's not what I'm really pursuing. But I really admire the people who are doing it. And I think stuff like when you see a show like Bluey, for example, which is really wonderful, I just know that if that had not been done overseas and come in as a production that was already done, and then they license it to American audiences, I don't see how a show like that survives the development process in America. Um, just because it's so real, and sometimes real stuff can be awkward and challenging.
But you can learn from that too, obviously.
Yeah.
So I imagine then it was finding that right balance, even with Sesame Street, obviously the curriculum and then the entertainment value.
One thing that's interesting is I never really worked directly on Sesame Street, the show. I've written for the characters, and I've done
Mm.
some peripheral things. I've done a little development work for them. But yeah, I just it's the show now is much different from what it was when I started watching it. And part of it is that the landscape is different. When I started watching Sesame Street, there were, there weren't really a lot of other shows of that nature being produced for kids. It was basically competing with a lot of reruns of shows that were not necessarily produced for kids, the Flintstones and the Warner Brothers cartoons. Um, there were a few shows on like Captain Kangaroo, but that was not really specifically trying to teach letters and numbers. Um, but nowadays, Sesame Street exists in a landscape of a whole lot of other shows. So I think that they sort of, it's tougher to stay doing what they did. Because I mean, my when I first started watching Sesame Street, I really regarded it more as a place that I visited every day as opposed
Mm.
to a show. Because the scenes on Sesame Street didn't have a really heavy continuing storyline. It's sort of, they'd come and go, and then there would be these inserts and Muppet things and animations, and then they'd come back to the street, and there would be, sort of a lightly connected storyline. And then that storyline became more and more connective and more of a continuous story. And that sort of, I think that required some format adjustments and changes. And I think that just the fact that it's still surviving,
Yeah.
55 years later, it's impressive. But they've evolved because the whole landscape of television has evolved. And there's
Um,
been more of a reliance on the Muppets, and the Muppets are wonderful, but
right.
there was a whole human cast of a dozen people when I was watching. At least when I was watching, it was four people, and then they added a lot more. but now then the Muppets sort of overtook. And the Muppets are great. There's something special about those people. I think I was more excited. When I first started working, and my wife Stephanie DeBruzzo was a puppeteer on Sesame Street, and when I would go to work with her, she went down to make the Elmo and Grouchland movie down in North Carolina, and I went to visit. And I'm more excited. I love all these puppeteers, and I love the characters, but when you are spending time with Bob and with Emilio, who played Luis, and with Roscoe, who plays Gordon, you're spending time with those people that you watched on television. They were your friends when you were growing up. I remember, watching Bob, and um, when you're spending time with them and sitting, having a meal with them, it's like, this is really special. These are the real big stars of Sesame Street. But the Muppets get all the credit.
That's a good point. They're underrated, certainly. But that said, it's just like, of course, still the
And
appeal.
they're all
Yeah.
wonderful people.
Yeah.
They were all, we lost Bob last year, and Emilio
Mm,
before that. And they're all very proud of the role that they had on Sesame
mm,
Street. And, you know, I've been in places where people came up to them and get very
mm.
emotional, because it's like, meeting someone you grew up with. And
Oh, absolutely. I know that's lovely. So I agree with you. Yeah, they're underrated. But then, of course, you got characters so beloved: Elmo, Oscar the Grouch, like, these obviously the puppets,
yeah, and what
not
I
going
say is,
anywhere.
I don't mean to
Mm.
diminish the work of the
No. Yeah,
puppeteers
of
and
course.
the importance of the Muppets, because they're
Yeah.
all wonderful people. I
Yeah.
got to know Carol Spinney over the years, and
Uh,
Carol, there was no one more devoted to their character and to their audience than Carol was.
yeah. Oh gosh, I know these people then when they pass, but again, like their legacy lives on forever. That's beautiful. I just wanted to, since you brought up your wife, Stephanie, of course, I just, if I may, give flowers, her in Avenue Q. Phenomenal.
You may, yeah,
Yes. Oh my gosh. May I ask? I'm just curious how you two
yeah,
met.
yeah. We both went to the same college, Northwestern
Mm.
University. Not at the same time. I had already graduated, and I came to visit campus, and Stephanie had already started building puppets, and um, she was interested in puppetry and doing stuff, Muppet stuff. And we had a mutual friend named Chris, if you're listening, Chris Araneta. Um, and Chris had a party, and I was in town doing some Henson related business, and I went over to Chris's party in Evanston, and Stephanie was there, and we met. And she was just a kid, but we talked a bit about what she wanted to do and all this stuff. And then the next year, I think it was, or a couple years later, I'm not sure of the timeline, but she um, created a puppet project
Mm.
on video, and it won the Student Emmy Award.
Wow.
And that got a little placement in the Chicago Tribune. And David Rudman, who is the creator of Don Quixote and one of the puppeteers on Sesame Street, David's wife saw that blurb, showed it to David, and
Mm.
David got in touch with Stephanie on campus and came to see the video she made, and basically invited her to audition for Sesame Street, because at that moment in time, Sesame Street had a big, big shortage of female performers, and they were getting
Oh.
a lot of pressure. Um, Henson was getting a lot of pressure from the Sesame people. We want more women involved. And so Sesame had planned, along with Henson, this big female audition for puppeteers. So David invited her to go to that audition. So she took the train to New York and went to the audition. She kept getting called back, and she got in touch with me because I was the only person she knew in New York. So we had dinner one night, and then she kept getting, she went back to the audition. At the end of the week, she calls me because um, at the end of the week, it was supposed the audition thing was like Monday through Friday or Tuesday through Friday or whatever it was, And on
Mm.
Friday it was supposed to be done. And then on Friday they said, okay, technically the audition's over, but if you can come back on Monday, we're going to have the producers of Sesame Street here, and we're going to have, more stuff to go through. And um, so Stephanie called me and said, what do I do? Because she was staying at a youth hostel. She was
Wow.
running out of money. And I invited her, well, if you need a place to stay, I'm going to be doing work over the weekend, but you can come and stay in my apartment. And so she did that. And we spent a lot of time that weekend just sort of hanging out and talking and watching movies and stuff. And right before it was time for her to go, we had our first kiss. And
Oh.
it's just sort of, and then when she came back to do another. They decided that they had found some really good people in that audition, but they needed a little more polish. So Henson decided to have a 1 month sort of Muppet class to teach Henson performing techniques, and they were going to do it over at the Sesame Street studio. So when people, weren't working, they can go and watch the production, and then, so Stephanie was invited to do that, and she called me up, and I said, well, if you need a place to stay, you can stay with me. Um, so she came, and she never left.
Oh, what a beautiful story. And then such pivotal points in your
Yeah.
lives, personally and professionally. That's beautiful. I love that. Oh my gosh. And then obviously I know you two have collaborated on projects together,
Yeah,
right?
now and then we do. We worked on some of the Henson stuff together, like Wubbulous World of Dr. Seuss. I was one of the writers on that, and she was a
Mm.
performer. And then, we try to work together whenever we can. We don't always get the opportunity. Um, and sometimes it's a good thing, because we get to, there's a bit of a buffer. But you get to work on, during the pandemic, as soon as they knew that things were going to shut down, they sent puppets out to all the performers to have at
Mm.
home in case anything came of it. And then Stephanie, who was doing Helpsters at the time for Apple TV, she
Mm.
came up with the idea to do, because Helpsters was about characters that help others.
Oh,
So she said, well, what if we do something where the Helpsters are helping the kids try and figure out how they can help their parents during this very difficult time? So Apple approved these little 5-minute shorts, and we shot them in our apartment. So I
mm.
ran the camera and set up everything, and we had the Helpsters productions people on over Zoom watching, and we set up a green screen, and it later got nominated for an Emmy Award for something we
Wow.
shot right here in our apartment. So we work on things together, and but we also work on things separately. So it's good.
Right. Mhm. Well, that's really wonderful, though. And so you touched on Wubbulous World of Dr. Seuss, because I know David Stephen Cohen wrote on that, who, of course, is
Ah,
also a writer
yes.
on Courage the Cowardly Dog. So when I reached out to you, I said I'm such a big fan of that show. So I'd love to know how you became involved with that show in particular.
Well, David had a lot to do with it and brought me into Courage too. I worked on that. I was on staff at the Henson Company. Basically, um, at that point, it was still fairly early in my writing career, and I was writing mostly for the licensed stuff and little things here and there, and I was doing Muppet meeting films and short things, and the Wubbulous World of Dr. Seuss came about, and I was asking people, well, hey, can I work on this? And they're like, well, we don't know, and it's not up to us, it's up to the showrunner. David Cohen is this executive producer we're bringing in um, he had then at that point had been doing mostly, he was moving back to New York after working in LA for a long time doing
Mm.
Alf and Living Single and all this stuff. So they're like,
Mhm.
well, bring in this guy, but what you do is, we'll give us your writing samples and we'll give it to David. And basically, um, David was saying, well, David was giving my stuff and said, here's this guy, we have him on staff. If you want to use him, it's not going to cost your budget any because he's on salary anyway at Henson. And you'd have to just pay if you let him write a script. Um, you have to just pay his script fee. So,
Mm.
to him, it's like, hey, that's great. I don't have, and because he didn't have a big budget for a big staff of writers. Nowadays, a lot of these shows are written by huge staffs of writers, or
Mm.
at least on a kid show, small staffs of writers. But um, at that point in time, a lot of kid shows were still primarily written by freelance writers. You'd have a head writer who would then give out scripts to a bunch of freelance people. And so David read my stuff, and we had a meeting, and he's like, "Yeah, I want to come. Your stuff's good. Come work on it." And to his wonderful credit, he said, "I don't understand why Henson's not using you more, because your stuff's really good." So I ended up, first I wrote a script, and even that first script, some of the Henson production people were like, "Well, you don't have to commit to buying his scripts right outright, because we're paying him, so it's not technically on spec. You
Mm.
can have him write this script and then decide whether or not you want to buy it." And David's like, "No, no, that's not how we would do business. We are commissioning the script from him. We are paying him." And so we did that. I did that first one, and then another one, and so I wrote or co-wrote like 7 episodes out of that first season of 20, and spent a lot of time with David in this. And the other main sort of staff writer was a guy named Will Ryan, who was a wonderful, wonderful guy who he was primarily a voice performer for animation in LA, and he came out to spend the the production period with us working on Wubbulous World, and we worked on a lot of scripts together. And it was interesting because uh, since the show was shot in this very small studio,
Mm.
it was primarily a blue screen show. There was no office space for the writers and the producers in that building. So they rented space down the street, a few blocks across. And they found office space in what was primarily a medical building.
Oh. Hmm.
So on the little sign in the lobby with the little movable letters, it actually, you looked on the thing and it'd say Dr. Schwartz, Dr. Goldstein, Dr. Seuss, second floor.
Wow.
Um, so yeah, that was a great show. And then um, after that ended, and David was working on Courage. He called me up and said, "Hey, come write it for Courage," and I ended up doing like 6 episodes of that.
Yeah, I saw because I was rewatching. I was like, oh wait, Craig Shemin. I'm going to be interviewing him. I'm excited with season one. Tell me about then like the shift with that in terms of writing with that tone, because obviously Courage, you got all the horror elements. So was that like fun doing that kind of
Oh,
different?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun because you're able to, definitely take things in a different direction. On Wobulous World, um, we were trying to keep in this Dr. Seuss world. It
Mhm.
was a show that was broadcast in the evening, at least primarily,
Mhm.
but Nickelodeon was planning to program it in the preschool block after that initial run. So you had to do a show that could air in the evening, but was primarily a preschool show. So it was a very tough show to do. But Courage was terrific because you could do almost anything.
Mhm.
And I say almost anything because, as I recall, the one thing that they didn't want us to have was characters with horns.
Oh, huh. How
Because,
specific.
well,
Devils?
yeah, that was pretty
Mhm.
much it. That's the one thing they were worried about, was letters from people complaining about devil worship
Interesting.
and stuff. So I mean, I think that was the only thing that, because as you recall, there are some really bizarre things in Courage. John Dilworth, a great person too, because his mind was totally
Hmm.
out there in terms of the what you could do. And one of the things that I remember, we would meet together at Stretch Films, the studio where they were it was John's studio, and we would sit in a room with me and David and a couple other writers and John Dilworth, and sort of talk through, you know, the pitch. And some, either you bring in a pitch for a story, you come in like with four or five ideas, and either they've already done it or they don't like it, so they narrow it down, and you're left with something that you brought in. Or if they don't like anything you brought in, sometimes they'll say, well, we have this, so let's work this. So and you talk it through, and you go away and you write it, and then um, I work with David on doing the revisions and stuff. And when it would go to Dilworth, he would I would get a fax back, or a copy, and he did what he would call dillying the script, or the outline. And he would go through, and just in the margins, you'd got little boxes, little storyboard boxes of what it looked like to him. And so you would revise your script to try and make sure that that's what you were accomplishing. So it was a very interesting collaborative process.
That's so cool. Now, of the ones you wrote, do you have a personal favorite?
I think, um, yeah, I think I wrote a script called Journey to the Center of Nowhere, and it
Yes.
was
Okay. The
the
eggplant.
eggplants.
Yeah.
And that, I think, I remember one of the executives from Cartoon Network coming up to me, that we were having the opening party, and he said, I think that's like the first really great script we've had, for the show. And or it was something like that. It's like, this was really captures it. And I was really proud of that. And then what I love more is that I got to go to the voice recording and hang out there. And then I
Oh,
got called in to be the voice of one of the eggplants. I think I was eggplant number 3. So I was,
oh
it's like,
wow.
attack. So I have very vivid memories of that. So I like that. I like Duck Brothers.
Yeah.
Um, Shirley the Medium, I enjoyed, because my mom's name was Shirley, so I named Shirley the Medium after my mother.
Oh, nice. Mhm.
Um, but I think Journey to the Center of Nowhere was really a fun one.
I just happened to have rewatched that episode and I saw you wrote it. I was like, oh, fantastic. Because I love the whole part when they're arguing, how they're going to cook Muriel. And then the little one just runs up, what if we bake her?
Yeah,
So I love
yay!
it. Yeah.
Um,
Oh,
and that was also fun because they had put out some other Cartoon Network DVD, and
hmm.
they wanted to put on a Courage episode as a bonus feature, and that's the one they picked. So I was very happy that.
Oh, cool. And then I know you also wrote the one with the like zombie directors. I was like, oh,
Yes, yes.
yeah, fantastic.
Benton Tarantella. That was at the time Quentin Tarantino was very big, as he is continues to be. So we
Mhm.
named him after Quentin Tarantino. And sometimes it's like that was an example of a script that just sort of really easily flows and goes through the process very, very well. Um, but yeah, I mean, I like doing that sort of thing where you're taking a real situation, like making a movie, and then trying to distill it through a different world. How would it look like in the world of Courage?
Oh, nice. Yeah. Because with Courage, obviously, the villains are so memorable on that series. Like, oh my,
Yeah.
giving us nightmares as kids,
Well,
but they stick with you. It's too good. I love it. Oh my gosh. But so then you're only involved with the first season with that
no,
series?
I was first and the fourth, I think. The first,
Oh,
yeah, because I think that the movie one, and I think there was another Conway the Contaminationist and a couple others that, yeah. So I think it was in the first season and the fourth season.
oh, interesting. Because I know a big thing with that show was that after season one, they had Courage speaking less. I find that interesting. Like when you watch it back, that's, yeah, interesting choice.
Yeah, and I think, yeah, it was, and also they also changed um, the name. I don't know if it was changed, if any of them aired with the old name, but it was Eustace and Muriel Bagg.
Yeah.
But in the first season, I think one or two were made. It was Hobag was the name, Eustace and
Oh,
Muriel Hobag, or and they thought that was sounded dirty,
that's
so
too
they
funny.
changed that. Yeah, I don't know what I think one of the reasons that they had him talk less is they wanted to rely on the visuals more, you know,
Hmm.
um, and make it give Courage more of a challenge in his communication. It's like if he's in trouble and needs to get help, if he can talk, it's sort of like,
Well, because the thing is, in that first season anyway, like when he talks though, it was more so to the audience, I
yeah, yeah,
noticed. But then he
yeah.
would have like his like miming and his like pantomiming things and whatever. But I just love that show though. I'd love to
And
meet
then
Marty
I'm not
Epstein.
sure. I think also did they get away from using the computer?
Oh, did they? I always
I
loved that character too because he was just so
I don't
sarcastic.
remember what if the computer came in later or earlier, but
He was in
um,
the first season for sure.
yeah.
Yeah, the computer. I loved that character. Too funny. But I don't know, because obviously with that show, again, like even though it's for kids, the dark elements in
Oh
it.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So in terms of all the stuff you've worked on, and I know this may vary for you over the years, but do you have a favorite project you've worked on, or whether you're currently working on?
Um, it's hard to pick just one. I
Hmm.
try and have a good time with whatever I'm doing. Um, there are, I think certainly, I'm proud of so many things that I've gotten to do. I think that the Salmon Friends book, it may be my favorite thing just because it accomplishes a lot of stuff. A small percentage of the people have seen Courage and other things that I've worked on will experience the Salmon Friends book. Um, but um, I thought it was a great way of paying tribute to Jim and Jane. So I really enjoy that. But also, I loved working on Clifford the Big Red Dog.
Oh,
Um, I I worked on a lot of dog shows.
yeah.
There were these two series of interstitials I did for Disney called Lou and Lou Safety Patrol and Tasty Time with Zafranc. I was very proud of those. Um, so I mean, and even like weird things that we did a cooking show with the Muppets called The Muppets Kitchen, and that was a show we did just for streaming, and I was really proud of that because we got a Webby Award an award nomination, and it was a nomination as best comedy show, not as a children's show. So I felt that that was sort of a great um, you know, great way of acknowledging that what we were doing was not really aiming at kids.
Mhm.
And when we were doing that cooking show, I did one episode that was a parody of the Towering Inferno.
Oh, wow.
They decided to build a sandwich much taller than they're supposed to. Um, and no kid is going to be aware of the Towering Inferno. Uh, so it was a lot of fun, but it's hard to pick just one as a favorite. Um, I've loved doing so many different things,
Mhm.
and that was sort of a joy of spending 14 years at the Henson Company. Is that some days I'd be writing tag for merchandise, and some days I'd be writing a script for Good Morning America, and some days I'd be writing a meeting film. Every day I went to the office, I got to do something else.
That
And
keeps it exciting. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And I do that now. I mean, one of the things, although I'm not writing a lot of children's shows for television, every year I write and direct a series of concerts for kids at the Little Orchestra Society in
Oh,
New York City.
nice.
So I get to, again, it's really fun to write for live audiences and to hear
Mhm.
the immediate response.
That's so amazing. I love that. But then also, you're still involved with Jim Henson Company in terms of being a curator for the museum, correct?
Yeah, I work with the Jim Henson Legacy. I'm
Okay.
president of that. That's the nonprofit organization that
Hmm.
Jane Henson created. And so I work on behalf of the Legacy with the museum to program the screenings and events that we do every month,
Mm.
uh, uh, roughly every month, and to try and find new ways of celebrating Jim's legacy and and presenting information about Jim.
Oh,
So
that's
I
beautiful.
still do that, and I was involved. through the legacy and through Jim Henson Company as a consultant. Um, I was a consultant with the Jim Henson Company archives for the Ron Howard documentary that's
Oh,
available
okay.
now, Idea Man. So I was able
Yes.
to come up with ideas for the archival footage that they were using, and then they licensed an interview that I had done with Jane Henson.
Oh, that's really wonderful. That's a great documentary, Jim Henson Idea Man on Disney Plus. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
I watched that recently too. It made me tear up just seeing things outside of what we know him for as well, getting to know him more with other projects that are more like lesser known and everything, and just like again, preserving his legacy and the people he worked with, the lives he touched. Yeah, that's wonderful. That's fantastic, Craig. And so, do you have a favorite Muppets or anything memorabilia, anything like that?
Oh,
You
yeah.
own? Mhm.
I'll tell you, it used to be that I would try and get a souvenir of
Mm.
everything I worked on. Um, and, I still have a bunch of things. And then I have a lot of regular Henson merchandise that I've gathered over the years. Um, but I think my favorite thing is a baseball glove.
Oh,
And it was a glove that I had at the company softball game when I first met Jim Henson.
oh wow.
And um, when Jim came up to me and started talking, and we chatted a little bit, and then he was taking the field. He didn't have a glove, so I loaned him mine. We were on opposite teams, and we'd exchange the glove at every inning. And at the end of the day, I asked Jim to sign it, and then I asked Frank Oz to sign it. So I think I have one of the only, if not the only, game used Jim Henson autographed baseball glove.
That's amazing. What a beautiful memory too. That's beautiful. Oh my God, and I love
So I
that.
think that that is probably my favorite thing, just because it's so unique.
Oh, absolutely. That's so cool. Oh my gosh, Craig, it's been such an absolute pleasure chatting with you. So as we're wrapping up though, I love ending my interviews by asking about advice. This could be advice for TV writers trying to break in, people in the industry, people wanting to pursue puppetry, anything you'd care to share advice.
Well, the biggest advice is to just do as much writing as you can.
Hmm.
Um, I remember when I was working at Henson, sometimes people would ask me, well, how do you get a job writing for the Muppets? Or they'd say, I want to get a job writing for the Muppets. And they'd be almost surprised when I'd say, well, you know, first you should write something that has the Muppets in it. You have to really demonstrate that you know what you're doing. Um, and you have to be really good. And I think that, uh, you know, you just have to write as much as possible, and you have to know that most of what you're writing is never going to see the light of day,
Yeah.
but it will make you better. You
Yes.
know, um, I have a whole file full of, well, digital now, but I have files full of spec scripts and things that never have been seen. But I know that just by doing it, every time you begin a script and finish it,
Yeah.
it helps you become a writer. It helps you. And you need to just sort of work on your storytelling and work on your character development, and also soak up as much as you can around you. Sometimes, we're so involved and engrossed in our devices that we forget to look around. And, you have to experience life to write about it. And you never know when something's going to inspire you. Um, and I think that's a very important thing to do, is just be aware of your surroundings and soak in as much as possible. Otherwise, we're going to have generations of people who are writing about how they experienced life by watching it on other shows, and that's sort of sometimes what happens. Um, so, I mean, that's all I can do is say, write as much, learn as much as you can about the stuff that came before. Soak in movies, television. Don't be afraid of black and white movies. Really enjoy things. Turn on TCM from time to time. Um, there's One of the influences in my life is the work of Billy Wilder. And there's a Billy Wilder movie called Kiss Me Stupid. And there's a line in that Dean Martin says, and it something like this: if you got what it takes, sooner or later somebody's going to take what you got.
I love
And
that.
I always think about that. I don't know if it's always true, that always happens, but what it does, it tells you that first and foremost, you have to have what it takes. You have
Yeah.
to you have to do it. You have to write. You can't just get a job as a writer. You have to do it. Nobody has to give you a job in order for you to sit down and write.
Yeah. Very true. And there's that quote, like preparation, opportunity, and luck, like where those all meet. So it's like right place, right time, but if you have the work, so you're
Yeah.
still working on your craft. Well said. Wonderful advice, Craig. So please feel free to share your social media where people can find your book, anything else you'd love to promote.
Well, you can find out more information about my book at samandfriendsbook.com. And you can order it at Amazon, barnesandnoble.com, most online retailers, and a few brick and mortar ones. And I'm sure your local bookstore can order it for you if you like that. Um, and then I'm also at craigshemin.com, and that'll point you to all sorts of things.
Wonderful. And then hopefully your new book, as you said, end of the year, you're aiming
I'm
for.
hoping, yeah. We have to get all this stuff. It's going off to be designed soon, and we'll see how quickly we can get it out. And then after that, my book about Jack Benny, but I don't know when that'll be out.
Gotcha. Very cool, though. Such a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time. Lovely chatting
Okay.
with you. And with that, that's going to conclude this week's episode of Storytelling Saga. Check out storytellingsaga.com, and as always, feel free to send me any questions, comments, or writing prompts by emailing me at storytellingsaga@gmail.com. Until next time, thank you for listening, and remember, write what you love.